Hi everybody and welcome to Safe Diving. So if you've watched this video where I spell out the pros and cons of backplate setups, then I've hopefully sold you on them, but I haven't actually told you how to buy one yet. And that was actually one of my cons of the backplate systems. They're not as straightforward to buy as a recreational BCD. They often come in separate parts that you assemble yourself. So I thought I'd make a video on how to buy a backplate system. The first thing that you need to do is to decide what kind of scuba diving your backplate will be for. You can build a wide range of backplate systems, and if you don't know what your BCD will be for, it can be tricky to buy the individual parts. Now, I often use cars as analogies for BCDs, and if you're building a car from scratch, you can build a tough 4x4 or a light streamlined track car. But if you're not too sure on what your car is going to be for, then you can select the wrong part so it doesn't do the thing you originally wanted it for. The more accurate your vision of what you're trying to build, the better you are going to be at buying the parts for it. Now, there are about 3 basic builds. You get small and lightweight, you get heavyweight and tough, and something that's customizable that you can kind of chop and change depending on what dive you have coming up. You can find many pre-assembled or at least packaged backplate setups, which are a great starting point because these should have everything that you need and all of the parts should fit no problem. You can't always mix and match brands and parts because the parts don't always line up. I actually have this problem with one of my backplates because the harness has grommets in the back of it that doesn't quite line up with the holes on the backplate. So if you can, try to stick to one brand, but other than that, let's dive into buying the right parts. Your whole system will comprise of about 4 different parts, the first of which is the backplate itself, which is pretty much the chassis of the car. It sets the foundation for what you're going to build on. Now, you have about 5 different choices of backplates, and the difference here is mainly in the weight and the strength and the cost. So the standard backplate is a steel backplate. Steel backplates are strong and heavy, so these will give you a tough starting point for singles or twin cylinders, and the trim weight of them mean that you don't need quite as much lead on your weight belt. If you want, you can opt for a thicker steel backplate for some extra weight as well. Most backplates are around 3mm thick, but you can find some that are like 6mm thick, which are heavier, and keeping that weight against your back is a great place to put it because it's nice and close to your back so it doesn't roll you around in the water. But it's obviously tough to travel with because of that weight, and it's not ditchable weight neither, so you do have to be quite confident with your buoyancy. Aluminium is the other standard material, which is a lighter alternative to steel, which makes it better for travel, but it's also a slightly softer metal, so it can bend a bit easier if you push it or mount something too heavy for it. So I tend to use aluminium as a single cylinder travel backplate that I can mount twins to if I need to. Then you can find more exotics like titanium and carbon fiber, which again are nice and light, only titanium is pretty expensive and carbon fiber can delaminate, which kind of put me off. You can save a few grams switching from aluminium to carbon fiber, but I didn't want to pay extra for something that could splinter apart if I wasn't careful. The lightest option if you're aiming for a featherweight system is a fabric backplate, but these have no rigidity to them, so they're only really suitable for singles. If you try to strap a pair of twins on, then they're just going to roll around and they're going to be a pain. You can get some that will take a special pair of plates for twin cylinders, but it just defies the point, and they're softer than a recreational BCD's plastic backplate, so the only benefit that you're going to get is the lighter weight and the custom harness. So I've never really seen much point of these. So this is my aluminium backplate. This is a fairly traditional shape backplate. It's skeletonized, as you can see here. Skeleton just means it's got these cutouts, which just mean that it's a little bit lighter because you haven't got quite as much material, but it still has all the same features that you'll see on a traditional backplate. So a few things that are sort of worth noting. All the way around the outside, you're going to have these little holes, and what these are for, these are mounting points for any kind of accessory. So some some divers will have a separate cylinder that is only for their BCD or their dry suit, and then those tiny little tanks are just going to mount onto there. You also have them along the bottom, so you can attach different accessories and just attachment points all around the side. Straight down the spine, you're going to have lots of holes cut into it. These are for your twinning bolts. So this is if you're diving with twin cylinders. One goes in at the top, and then down at the bottom, you'll either have a single hole that marries up 11 inches down from the holes at the top, or you have this kind of slot, this vertical line here, which just allows a little bit of leniency, sort of where your twinning bolts can go. Either side of that, ideally you'll have these slots here. So these are for single cylinder cam bands. These just mean that these are going to be 2 inches apart, and they means that you can thread your cam band through that, so you can mount a single cylinder onto your back plate, and you're not going to need a single tank adapter, but I'll talk about those later. And then, other than that, you'll have a horizontal slot down at the bottom. This is for your crotch strap. Again, I'll talk about crotch straps in a second. But the other slots, these ones here, these are for your waistband, and then these ones here at the top, these are for your shoulder straps. So pretty much every backplate will have those. And yeah, other than that, they come in slightly different shapes and sizes. You can get smaller sizes for ladies, and you can get sort of longer if you're really, really tall. And X-Deep, for example, they're coming out with some sort of X-shaped ones, which are just a bit more comfortable. But yeah, this is pretty much the kind of the golden standard, as it were. You get about 3 different choices when it comes to your harness, and your harness is your car's interior, which determines how comfortable and safe you are, and it comes down to the brands you're choosing, really, how much you value your comfort and how much you fear the dreaded failure point. So what I call a recreational harness like this will be pretty much what you expect on a recreational BCD, with lots of padding, lots of D-rings all over it, and quick release, quick adjustment straps. This will just bolt onto your backplate with book screws, which make these the least universal because all of these grommets need to actually line up properly with the backplate. They usually come in standard small, medium, large size charts, and these are usually the most expensive. They're the most comfortable, but they are high on failure points and have very little customizability. You can't really move the parts around, they're usually stitched into place. And the whole point of switching to a backplate setup is that it's custom to you, so a recreational style harness doesn't really make too much sense to me. Then we have quick adjust harnesses, which comprise of a 2-inch webbing strap with padding and quick adjust buckles. These offer you more customizability, so you can rearrange the D-rings and the parts will kind of thread directly to the backplate itself. These are cheaper, a tad less comfortable, but they still have plenty of padding, but they do have failure points, so they're the kind of the middle ground. Pretty easy to get in and out of, and you can choose sort of where and how many D-rings to put where, but they usually have breaks in them, which just means that it's not a continuous strap, so it does have weak points. The simplest of harnesses is the cheapest and favoured by many technical divers. Not because we're cheap, but because those one-piece harnesses are the most customizable and have the fewest failure points. Because they're made from a single piece of 2-inch webbing throughout the entire harness, so you have exact control over how long each section is and exactly where any D-rings are. And it's tough, but it is pretty Spartan. You don't usually get much, if any, padding. This all depends on what you're diving. Wings are, I don't know, the tyres, I guess. You pick the size and the sturdiness, but wings boil down to 2 different categories for either single cylinders or twin cylinders. Or side mount, I guess, so 3. But that's a different category. So wings for single cylinders will have a narrow gap in the middle to cradle the single tank, and the corrugated hose will be over the left-hand shoulder to make space for the first stage and the tank valve. Wings for twin cylinders will have a wide space in the center and a central inflator hose. You cannot, unfortunately, mix and swap singles and twin wings over. If you try to fit twin cylinders over a single wing, the bladder won't be able to inflate fully because the lobes are literally trapped between you and your tanks. The inflator hose will also be pushing against one of your first stages, which isn't ideal. The flip side is using a twin wing on a single tank, and we actually have a name for this problem. It's called the tacho effect. Without the two tanks next to one another, if you inflate the wing, the gas will just collect in the lobes and float up either side of your single tank, higher than your inflator, so you won't be able to dump any gas or shift it around without uprighting. So you can really be sort of lopsided. So it's best to stick to a single wing for singles and twin wing for twins. It sounds obvious, I know, but I get asked. The two traditional shapes of wings are horseshoe and donut, and now you can get trapezoidal. Horseshoe wings are shaped like a horseshoe. These aren't tricky terms here, and the only benefit I have ever managed to find is that when you stand your unit up on the deck, the central section of the bladder can't get trapped underneath your tank. Donuts, shaped like a donut, go figure, allow for free travel of gas even in a head down position. The problem with horseshoes is that gas can get caught in one lobe and make you lopsided, and you need to do a little shimmy to make it all equal. You also usually don't get a dump valve on the right lobe. Everything controlling your buoyancy is traditionally on your left hand side, so you only need to use one hand to adjust your buoyancy. So horseshoes are dropping out of popularity fast. And trapezoidal wings are obviously shaped like a trapezoid. The simpler name is diamonds, but these guys are usually exclusively for side mounts with all of the buoyancy in the small of your back, but they don't have any mounting options for singles or twins, so just leave it to the side mount divers. You can also find wings marked as RB or something similar with two inflator hoses, and these are redundant bladder wings that basically have one outer shell with two separate bladders inside. One that you use normally over your left shoulder, but should that one fail in some way, like a puncture, you can then use the second bladder, which is connected to the second inflator on your right side. Now, you can't or shouldn't use both of them at the same time because there's only really enough room inside the shell to inflate one of them fully at any one time. You don't get twice the buoyancy, just a second chance if something goes wrong. And whilst we're on buoyancy, I need to touch on it because it confuses quite a lot of people. Wings will come in lots of different buoyancies depending on what you need. The buoyancy will be measured in pounds, newtons or kilos, but pounds is the traditional unit and will usually be in the name of the wing or stated somewhere in the description at least. The smallest you'll find is going to be around 18 pounds of lift. You may be able to find smaller, but 18 is pretty small, and it's important that you have a good grasp on your buoyancy and how much lead you take down with you. The largest you'll find will be something like a 60-pound wing, I think, and that's for when you are laden with gear and you really need to offset that so that you don't just sink down when you get to any great depth. As a general ballpark, if you're diving a single 12 litre, 30 pounds is kind of your sweet spot. Twin 12s, it's 40, 45 pounds is a good place. Exactly how much buoyancy you need depends on the buoyancy, not the dry weight of all of your gear in the water that you're diving in. So it can be a little bit complicated to work out, but just go by the descriptions of the manufacturer's pages and you should get a good idea of kind of how much buoyancy you need in your wing. You want to be on camera? Look at the camera. Huh? Who's that? Good boy. And finally on wings, some will be fitted with a retractor system. Now personally I don't like these and I'll explain why in a moment, but you do tend to see these on a lot of recreational BCDs and backplate wings, either external or internal, as kind of a bungee that wraps around the bladder and basically pulls it in when it's deflated so it doesn't flap around and get caught in anything. The reason why I don't like them is that if you do puncture your bladder, even in a small way, they literally squeeze all of the air out of that bladder. If you don't have one fitted, then you can manage a leak by keeping the leak at the lowest point, but with a bungee squeezing it all out, you don't stand much of a chance. With those three basic parts, you pretty much have built a BCD, but you can build further, and of course you don't want to miss any important parts, so there are a few bits worth considering. The first is how you're going to attach your tank to your backplate. Now this is either going to be a traditional cam band that you just thread through the wing and your backplate, or you'll be needing twinning bands and bolts that hold your twins together, and that's just bolts through your wing and your backplate. You can use pretty much any cam bands, they're all 2 inches wide and they all do the same thing, so just find one that you like. You can fit a single tank adapter, which will be a U-shaped metal thing that kind of bolts onto your backplate, but if your backplate has those 2 metal slots down the spine, then you don't really need one, to be honest. For twins, your twinning bolts need to be long enough to reach through the wing, through the backplate, and any weight that you may have, with room for a nut and a washer, but not so long that they're digging into your back. But they do need to be about 11 inches apart so they line up properly. If your harness isn't fitted with a crotch strap, then it's best to get one. A crotch strap will move the BCD or stop the BCD from moving around and riding up, more importantly when you're on the surface. It's also a handy attachment point to clip things off onto, and a handy place to clip your DPV so it can pull you along comfortably. While diving in warm waters with just a rash vest, your metal backplate can seem pretty hard, so you can get a back pad to add a bit of padding. With a bunch of book screws or coach bolts or whatever, a thin pad can be fitted over your metal backplates to add some padding, as well as a little bit of storage too in some cases. At the lower section, you can usually get a section of bungee webbing that can be a small pocket for a lift bag or something. Not the easiest to reach, but it's an option. Again, check compatibility if you're mixing brands, because the grommet holes may not line up. You can add integrated weights to your backplate setup if you want to. They usually comprise of a quick release pouch that attaches to your waistband and something to your backplate too. Otherwise they can get a bit floppy because of the weight inside and just slide down when you're horizontal in the water. You can also get trim pouches where you can fit lead somewhere on your harness, almost anywhere, but these aren't usually quick release, so you can't dump them easily, but you can place lead somewhere convenient. Another convenient place to put lead is pretty much on your backplate, either on the inside of the spinal groove or the outside of the spine between the twins, but yeah, that's not very dumpable there neither. Whilst we're talking about weights and pockets, you can add storage pockets to your backplate system if you like. These can be attached to your waistband. Just look for pockets that have a tri-glider fitting so that your pocket stays in position and doesn't slide around if you put anything heavy in it. And from the side mount community, we also have butt pouches that sit over your butt and attached with bolt snaps, so they're nice and out of the way. They're a pretty convenient place to store some bits. The only other thing that I'm going to mention is a couple bits for your harness. The first one is a loop, a bungee loop. These usually come with your harness, and you put these under your shoulder D-rings, and these are usually made from a section of inner tube or elastic webbing, and they can be used to keep anything you have clipped off from just dangling around in the water. I use mine to keep my backup torch close to my body so it doesn't just dangle around. But don't get them confused with stage bungees if you're buying them online. They're quite a bit bigger and made to go around your tank and keep hoses in place, but they look very, very similar. The other loop that you can go on your harness is something that I use, but only a handful of manufacturers make them, but they're a great way to make your one-piece solo harness adjustable without adding any clips or brakes. The shoulder strap and the waist strap are basically the same. They're connected. They just slip through the loop to make one shoulder strap longer and easy to get into. Some divers use a 2-part clip on one strap attached a few inches apart, so when it's undone, the straps are nice and long, but when the clip's done up, the strap is the perfect length. And I think that's about it. I mean, there's going to be a million other independent gizmos that you can customize your backplate system with, but those are my kind of basics. After this, I'm going to do a video on how to thread your harness onto your backplate once it's actually arrived and make sure that it's the right size for you, so stay tuned for that. And if you want to see me assemble my actual backplate setups, they'll be popping up here so you can actually see those being built. As ever, if you enjoy this video, then don't forget to like and share them with your diving buddies and subscribe to the channel so it can grow. Thank you for watching, and of course, safe diving.